Two athletes stand at the starting line of an Olympic final. They have trained with similar intensity. Their bodies are in comparable condition. Their technique has been refined through thousands of hours of practice. The difference in their physical capabilities is marginal, almost undetectable. And yet, when the race is over, one will stand on the podium and the other will not. What separated them? The answer, more often than not, shock is what happened between their ears in the seconds before the starting gun fired. One athlete stepped to the line believing they would win. The other stepped to the line hoping they might. That difference, invisible to spectators, impossible to measure with instruments, determined the outcome before the race even began. This is not motivational fantasy. This is documented reality across every domain of human performance: business, athletics, academics, creative fields, leadership. The research consistently shows that at the highest levels of competition, where everyone is talented and everyone works hard, mindset is the differentiating factor. Not the only factor, but often the decisive one. Success starts in the mind, not because positive thinking magically produces results, but because the way you think determines what you attempt, how you respond to setbacks, how you interpret feedback, how much risk you're willing to take, and how long you persist when things get difficult. Your thoughts shape your actions shape your results, and your results reinforce your thoughts, creating either a virtuous cycle or a vicious one. Winners are not born with different brains. They do not possess some mystical quality unavailable to everyone else. What they possess, what they have developed, one consciously or unconsciously, is a specific set of thought patterns and mental habits that direct their energy toward productive action rather than self-defeating worry. These patterns can be learned. They can be practiced. They can become as automatic as breathing. This audiobook is about those patterns, not surface-level affirmations or empty positivity, but the actual cognitive frameworks that high performers use to navigate difficulty, maintain confidence, and sustain effort over time. And we're going to examine the research on peak performance psychology, the thought habits of exceptional individuals across multiple fields, and the specific practices that translate understanding into behavior. Over the next 10 chapters, you'll learn how winners think differently, how to rewrite the internal stories that limit you, how to build genuine confidence rather than perform false bravado, how to use mental rehearsal to prepare for high-stakes moments, how language shapes reality, how to reframe adversity, how to escape the comparison trap, how to protect your mental environment, and how to integrate all of this into daily action. By the end, you'll understand that thinking like a winner is not about pretending difficulty doesn't exist or manufacturing enthusiasm you don't feel. It's about developing mental clarity, emotional resilience, and the capacity to direct your attention toward what serves your goals rather than what undermines them. It's work. But it's work that pays compound interest on every other form of effort you invest. The game is won or lost in your mind long before it's decided in reality. Let's make sure you're playing to win. Chapter 1. The Mental Game. Why mindset determines everything. If you want to understand why mindset matters, start with the research of psychologist Carol Dweck. Over decades of studying achievement, Dweck identified two fundamental beliefs people hold about their abilities: fixed mindset and growth mindset. These beliefs, while seemingly abstract, produce dramatically different real-world outcomes. People with a fixed mindset believe that talent, intelligence, and ability are largely static. So you either have it or you don't. Success comes from being naturally good at something. Failure reveals inadequacy. Because ability is fixed, these individuals avoid challenges that might expose their limitations, give up quickly when things get hard, see effort as evidence of insufficient talent, and feel threatened by the success of others. People with a growth mindset believe that abilities can be developed through effort and learning. Talent is a starting point, not a ceiling. Success comes from persistent effort. Failure is information about what to try differently. Because ability is developable, these individuals seek challenges that stretch them, persist through difficulty, see effort as the path to mastery, and find lessons in the success of others. The research shows that these two mindsets produce wildly different trajectories. In studies of students, those with growth mindsets outperform their fixed mindset peers over time, even when starting from the same baseline. In studies of athletes, growth mindset predicts who continues improving and who plateaus. In studies of business leaders, growth mindset correlates with adaptability, innovation, and long-term success. What's remarkable is that mindset is not personality. It's not hardwired. It's a belief system, and belief systems can change. Dweck's research shows that teaching people about growth mindset, showing them the neuroscience of how the brain develops through challenge, actually changes their behavior. They start attempting harder tasks, they persist longer, they perform better. But mindset is only part of the mental game. There's also the question of where you direct your attention. Winners focus on what they can control. Losers focus on what they can't. This sounds simple, but it has profound implications. When something goes wrong, the person focused on uncontrollable factors asks, whose fault is this? What external circumstance caused this? Why is the world unfair? The person focused on controllable factors asks, what can I do about this? What's the next available action? How can I influence the outcome? The psychological term for this is locus of control. Internal locus of control means you believe your actions significantly influence outcomes. The external locus of control means you believe outcomes are primarily determined by external forces. Decades of research show that internal locus of control predicts achievement, resilience, and well-being across virtually every context studied. Then there's the narrative you construct around events. Psychologist Martin Seligman's work on explanatory style shows that how you explain setbacks to yourself determines how you respond to them. What people with pessimistic explanatory styles see setbacks as permanent, pervasive, and personal. This always happens, it affects everything, and it's because of who I am. People with optimistic explanatory styles see setbacks as temporary, specific, and external. This happened once, in this situation, because of factors I can address. Same event, completely different interpretation, and that interpretation determines whether you give up or keep going. Seligman's research with everyone from insurance salespeople to Olympic swimmers shows that optimistic explanatory style predicts persistence, performance, and success, independent of talent or circumstances. The mental game also includes your relationship with fear and discomfort. Winners are not fearless. They feel fear and act anyway. They have learned to interpret the physiological arousal of stress, rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing, heightened alertness, as excitement rather than threat. Research by psychologist Alison Wood Brooks shows that reframing anxiety as excitement improves performance in high-pressure situations. The body's response is identical. The interpretation changes everything. The point of all this research is not to make you feel bad if you recognize fixed mindset thinking, external locus of control, or pessimistic explanatory style in yourself. The point is to show you that these are patterns, not personality traits. They can be identified, examined, and changed through deliberate practice. The mental game is learnable, and learning it is one of the highest return investments you can make. Chapter 2. Winners think differently. The thought patterns that separate success from mediocrity. If you could listen to the internal dialogue of a winner and compare it to the internal dialogue of someone who consistently underperforms, you would hear stark differences. Not occasional differences, but consistent patterns that repeat across situations and over time. Winners think in terms of process, not just outcomes. When approaching a challenge, they focus on the specific actions they need to take rather than fixating on the end result. The amateur thinks, I need to win this competition. The professional thinks, I need to execute my technique, manage my energy, and stay present for each rep. The outcome is important, but it's downstream from process. The person focused on outcome becomes anxious and tight. The person focused on process stays grounded and executes. This distinction shows up in research on peak performance across domains. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow states shows that peak performance occurs when attention is fully absorbed in the present task, not divided between the task and worry about results. Athletes perform best when focused on the immediate action. This shot, this swing, this step, rather than the scoreboard. Performers excel when immersed in the performance rather than evaluating how they're being received. Winners also think in terms of growth, not validation. They approach challenges as opportunities to learn and improve rather than tests of their worth. When facing a difficult project, the growth-oriented thinker asks, "What will I learn from this? How will this make me better?" The validation-seeking thinker asks, "Will I look competent? What if I fail?" The first mindset produces engagement. The second produces anxiety. There's also the way winners process setbacks. When something goes wrong, they ask better questions. Not, "Why does this always happen to me?" but "What can I learn from this?" Not, "Who's to blame?" but "What's within my control to change?" Not, "Is this too hard for me?" but "What do I need to develop to handle this?" These questions direct attention towards solutions rather than spiraling into helplessness. Winners think long-term while acting short-term. They can hold a long-term vision, where they want to be in 5 years, to what they're building toward, while remaining focused on what they need to do today. This dual timeline thinking prevents both short-sighted decisions that sacrifice the future for immediate comfort and paralysis from being overwhelmed by the gap between current reality and distant goals. Another pattern: winners separate identity from performance. They can give full effort and care deeply about results without collapsing their sense of self-worth into every outcome. A loss is a loss. Only a failure is a failure. It's not a verdict on their value as a human being. This separation creates psychological space to take risks because the downside of failure is contained. The person whose identity is fused with performance cannot afford to fail, so they play it safe and never reach their potential. Winners also think in terms of what they can add, not just what they need to fix. After a performance or project, they ask both. What went well that I want to do more of? And what needs improvement? The person focused only on fixing deficits becomes demoralized. The person focused on building strengths stays energized. Both are important, but the balance matters. There's one more pattern worth highlighting. Winners think in terms of agency. They believe they have the power to influence outcomes through their actions. This does not mean they believe they control everything. They don't. But they focus their mental energy on the variables they can influence, rather than the ones they cannot. This produces what psychologists call an internal locus of control, and it's one of the most reliable predictors of achievement across every domain studied. These thought patterns are not innate, they are learned, and they can be deliberately cultivated through awareness and practice. The first step is noticing your current patterns. When you face difficulty, what's your automatic thought? When you experience a setback, where does your mind go? When you consider a challenge, what questions do you ask? Simply observing without judgment begins the process of change. Chapter 3. Rewriting your internal narrative, changing the stories you tell yourself. You are telling yourself a story about who you are, every day, every hour, often without realizing it. This story, constructed from past experiences, absorbed messages from others, and your interpretation of your own behavior, shapes what you believe is possible for you. And what you believe is possible determines what you attempt. The story might sound like, "I'm not good with people. I've never been athletic. I'm not creative. I'm bad at math. I always quit things. I'm not leadership material." These statements feel like facts because they're based on evidence. Things that happened, things you tried and failed at, feedback you received. But they are not facts, they are interpretations. And interpretations can be rewritten. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most researched and validated forms of a psychological treatment, is built on a simple premise. Thoughts create feelings, and feelings drive behavior. Change the thought, and you change the cascade that follows. The technique is not to replace negative thoughts with positive affirmations, which the brain often rejects as false. The technique is to examine the thought for accuracy and replace it with something more accurate and more useful. Take the thought, "I'm not good with people." What's the evidence? Maybe you're introverted and social interaction drains you. Maybe you had awkward experiences in high school. Maybe you struggle with small talk. Fine, those are real, but they don't support the conclusion that you're not good with people. They support the conclusion that you're introverted. that you haven't developed certain social skills yet, or that certain contexts are harder for you than others. Once the revised thought might be, I'm still learning how to connect with people in ways that feel authentic to me. Same reality, completely different implication for what's possible. The power of rewriting your narrative is not that it makes you delusional. It's that it opens doors you had unconsciously closed. When you believe you're not good with people, you avoid situations where connection matters. You don't practice. You don't improve. The belief becomes self-fulfilling. And when you believe you're still learning, you approach social situations as practice opportunities. You get better. The new belief also becomes self-fulfilling, but in the opposite direction. One especially damaging narrative is the fixed narrative of past failure. I tried that before, and it didn't work. This thought stops people from attempting anything they previously failed at, as if one data point determines all future outcomes. And the revision is not to deny the failure, but to contextualize it. I tried that before with the resources, knowledge, and circumstances I had then. I have different resources, knowledge, and circumstances now. The outcome might be different. There's also the narrative of comparison, the story that you're behind, that everyone else has it figured out, that you're not where you should be by now. This narrative is almost universal and almost entirely based on false information. When you are comparing your internal experience, which includes all your doubts, fears, and struggles, to other people's external presentation, which is curated and polished, you have no idea what's actually happening in their minds or their lives. The comparison is not just unfair, it's impossible. The useful revision, I am on my own timeline, building my own thing, and comparison to anyone else is irrelevant. This is not a platitude. It's a decision about where to direct your attention. Attention on others' progress produces envy and discouragement. Attention on your own progress produces motivation and clarity. Rewriting your narrative requires catching the old story when it appears. This is harder than it sounds because the story runs automatically in the background, like an operating system. The practice is to notice when you feel discouraged, anxious, or stuck, and ask, what story am I telling myself right now? What thought is driving this feeling? Once you've identified the thought, examine it. Is it accurate? Is it useful? What would be more accurate and more useful? This is not toxic positivity. You are not required to tell yourself everything is great when it isn't. You are simply refusing to let inaccurate, unhelpful stories run your life unchallenged. The goal is truth and utility, not relentless cheerfulness. Sometimes the truth is hard, but even hard truths can be framed in ways that point toward action rather than paralysis. Your story about yourself is not fixed. It was written, it can be rewritten, and the person holding the pen is you. Chapter 4, The Confidence Equation. Building Unshakable Self-Belief. Confidence is one of the most misunderstood concepts in performance psychology. People treat it as a feeling you either have or don't have, as if confidence is a personality trait or a mood that arrives mysteriously and leaves just as unpredictably. This is wrong. Confidence is not a feeling. It is a judgment you make about your ability to handle a specific challenge, and judgments can be based on evidence. The confidence equation, as researchers understand it, comes down to this. Confidence equals competence plus past success plus preparation minus doubt. Let's break that down. Competence is actual skill. You cannot fake this. If you're not genuinely capable, no amount of positive thinking will produce confidence that withstands contact with reality. This is why the first step in building confidence is building capability. You practice, you learn, you improve. The feeling of confidence follows from the reality of competence, not the other way around. Past success is evidence you've done hard things before. Every time you attempt something difficult and succeed, or even attempt it and learn from failure, you are gathering data that you can handle challenges. Psychologist Albert Bandura calls this mastery experience, and his research shows it's the most powerful source of self-efficacy. The problem is that people often discount their past successes or attribute them to luck. The practice is to deliberately catalog what you've accomplished. Keep a success log. Write down hard things you've done. When doubt appears, consult the evidence. Preparation is the work you do before the moment of performance. If you've trained for the race, studied for the exam, rehearsed the presentation, you have rational grounds for confidence. You know you're ready. If you haven't prepared, your anxiety is not irrational. It's your brain accurately assessing that you're not ready. This is why winners prepare obsessively. Not because preparation guarantees success, but because it eliminates one source of doubt. Doubt is the voice that says you can't, you're not good enough, you're going to fail. Some doubt is useful. It keeps you sharp and prevents complacency. But excessive doubt paralyzes. The technique for managing it is not to suppress it or fight it, but to examine it. Is this doubt based on reality or fear? If it's reality, if you genuinely lack a skill or haven't prepared, then address it. Build the skill. Do the preparation. If it's fear, the brain's attempt to keep you safe by avoiding risk. Acknowledge it and act anyway. One particularly effective practice for building confidence is progressive mastery. You don't build confidence by attempting the hardest version of a challenge first. You build it by succeeding at progressively harder versions. The public speaker starts by speaking to one person, then 5, then 20, then 100. Each success raises the baseline for what feels manageable. Each step builds evidence that you can handle the next one. There's also confidence through modeling. Bandura's research shows that seeing people similar to you succeed increases your belief that you can succeed. This is why representation matters. If you can see someone from your background, with your constraints, accomplishing what you want to accomplish, it becomes more believable that you can do it too. Seek out examples, study them. Let their success expand your sense of what's possible. Another source, social support. Having people who believe in you, who remind you of your capability when you forget, who provide encouragement without false praise. This matters, not because their belief makes you capable, but because it helps you access the capability you already have. Surround yourself with people who see your potential and hold you to it. False confidence, the kind built on bluster and ego rather than evidence, is brittle. It cracks under pressure. Real confidence, the kind built on competence, past success and preparation, is resilient. It doesn't require you to feel invincible. It just requires you to know, based on evidence, that you can handle what's coming. And when the evidence says you can, the feeling of confidence follows naturally. Chapter 5. Visualization and mental rehearsal. Training your brain for success. Olympic athletes do it. Surgeons do it. Musicians, public speakers, fighter pilots, and elite performers across virtually every domain do it. They practice in their minds before they practice in reality. This is not superstition, it's applied neuroscience. When mental rehearsal, the practice of vividly imagining yourself performing a task successfully, activates the same neural pathways that fire during actual performance. Brain imaging studies show that when you visualize playing the piano, the motor cortex lights up as if your fingers are actually moving. When you visualize running, the brain regions responsible for coordinating movement activate. The brain, to a remarkable degree, what does not distinguish between vividly imagined experience and real experience. This has practical implications. Research on athletes shows that mental practice combined with physical practice produces better results than physical practice alone. A study of basketball players found that those who did mental rehearsal of free throws improved nearly as much as those who physically practiced, and significantly more than those who did neither. When the brain was learning the motor pattern through imagination. But visualization is not just for physical skills. It works for any performance that involves executing a sequence of actions under pressure. Public speakers visualize delivering their talk smoothly. Negotiators visualize the conversation going well. Entrepreneurs visualize the pitch succeeding. The practice prepares the brain for the actual moment, making the real thing feel more familiar and less threatening. Effective visualization is not vague daydreaming. It's detailed, systematic, and multisensory. You don't just see yourself succeeding. You feel the physical sensations. You hear the sounds. You notice the environment. You run through the entire sequence, step by step, exactly as you want it to happen. The more vivid and detailed the mental rehearsal, the more effectively it prepares your brain. The technique used by many elite performers is called process visualization. And instead of only imagining the desired outcome, standing on the podium, closing the deal, receiving applause, you visualize the process of getting there. The athlete visualizes their technique at each phase of the race. The speaker visualizes managing nervousness, making eye contact, transitioning between points. The entrepreneur visualizes handling objections, staying calm under questioning, pivoting when needed. This type of visualization prepares you not just for success, but for difficulty. It's useful to visualize things going perfectly. It's more useful to visualize things going imperfectly and handling it well. What if you stumble over a word? What if the client pushes back? What if you feel a surge of anxiety? Rehearsing your response to these moments makes them less likely to derail you when they happen. There's also the practice of using visualization to build confidence before high-stakes moments. Before a big performance, athletes often spend time mentally reviewing past successes. They replay moments when they performed well, when they overcame challenges, when they felt strong and capable. This activates the neural networks associated with those experiences and primes the brain to access that state again. Visualization is also effective for managing anxiety. When you repeatedly imagine yourself handling a situation successfully, the situation becomes less threatening. Well, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, learns that this scenario is not dangerous. The physiological arousal that accompanies anxiety decreases. You approach the real event calmer and more grounded. The practice itself is simple. Find 5 to 10 minutes of quiet. Close your eyes. Imagine the upcoming performance in as much detail as possible. See it from your own perspective, what you'll see, hear, and feel. Walk through it step by step, and then notice yourself handling challenges smoothly and with a successful outcome. Do this daily in the days leading up to the event. Mental rehearsal is not magic. It will not replace physical practice or compensate for lack of preparation. But when combined with actual skill development, it accelerates learning, improves performance under pressure, and builds confidence through repeated mental exposure to success. Your brain is trainable. Train it for the performance you want to give. Chapter 6, The Language of Winners. How your words shape your reality. The words you use, both in your internal self-talk and in conversation with others, are not neutral. They shape perception, influence emotion, and direct behavior. Change your language and you change your reality. Not because words have magical power, but because language is the tool the brain uses to categorize experience. The categories you create determine what you notice, what you feel, and what you do. And start with the language of agency. Winners use active voice. Losers use passive voice. The winner says, "I chose to stay late and finish the project." The loser says, "I had to stay late." Same action. The first implies control. The second implies victimhood. This distinction might seem trivial, but research on locus of control shows that language patterns reflecting agency predict achievement across multiple domains. There's also the language of possibility versus limitation. In the phrase "I can't" shuts down exploration. "I haven't figured out how to yet" leaves the door open. "That's impossible" ends the conversation. "That's difficult, and I'm not sure how to approach it" invites problem solving. The second version in each case is not dishonest optimism. It's accurate assessment paired with openness to learning. Winners are careful with absolutes. They avoid words like always, never, everyone, and no one. Words that turn specific events into global judgments. The person who fails once and says "I always fail" has turned one data point into an identity. The person who says "I failed this time" keeps the failure specific and leaves room for different outcomes in the future. Research on cognitive distortions in depression shows that absolutist language patterns are both a symptom and a cause of hopelessness. There's the language of problems versus challenges. A problem is something wrong that needs fixing. A challenge is something difficult that offers growth. Same situation, different frame. The word problem triggers threat response in the brain. The word challenge triggers engagement. Athletes and performers who frame difficulties as challenges rather than threats show better performance under pressure. Winners also use language that separates behavior from identity. They say, I made a mistake, not I am a mistake. They say that didn't work, not I'm a failure. This linguistic distinction protects self-esteem while allowing honest assessment of performance. You can acknowledge error without internalizing it as a verdict on your worth. The language you use about others matters too. The person who constantly criticizes, complains, and speaks negatively is training their brain to notice what's wrong. The person who regularly acknowledges what's working, what they appreciate, and what they admire is training their brain to notice what's right. This is not about being fake or ignoring problems. It's about balance. The ratio of positive to negative language in your daily speech reveals and reinforces your habitual mental focus. Then there's the question of how you describe yourself to yourself and others. When someone asks what you do you say, I'm trying to be a writer? Or I'm a writer? The first suggests uncertainty and impermanence. The second claims the identity. Research on identity-based habit change shows that claiming an identity, even before you fully earned it, influences behavior. The person who says, I'm a runner, is more likely to run than the person who says, I'm trying to start running. One powerful linguistic shift, replacing but with and. The word but negates what came before it. I want to start a business, but I'm afraid positions desire and fear as mutually exclusive. Son, I want to start a business, and I'm afraid acknowledges both can be true simultaneously. This small change makes emotion less paralyzing. You can be afraid and still act. The practice is to start noticing your language. What words do you use repeatedly? What phrases appear in your internal monologue? Are they words of agency or helplessness, possibility or limitation? When you notice unhelpful language, pause and rephrase. Not to lie to yourself, but to speak more accurately and more usefully. Over time, more constructive language becomes automatic. And when language changes, thinking changes. And when thinking changes, everything downstream from thinking changes too. Chapter 7, Embracing Adversity. Why winners see obstacles as opportunities. Every person who has accomplished something difficult will tell you the same thing. The obstacles were not incidental to their success. The obstacles were essential to it, not because struggle is inherently noble, but because overcoming difficulty builds capabilities you cannot develop any other way. The Stoic philosophers understood this 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This sounds like wordplay, but it's a precise description of how growth works. The obstacle is not separate from the path. It is the path. The difficulty you're trying to avoid is the exact thing you need to engage with to develop the strength, skill, or wisdom required for the next level. Modern psychology has a term for this: post-traumatic growth. Research shows that a significant percentage of people who face serious adversity, illness, loss, failure, trauma, report that the experience changed them in positive ways. Not that it wasn't painful, not that they would choose to go through it again, but that they emerged with greater resilience, deeper relationships, clearer priorities, or stronger capabilities than they had before. And the difference between people who grow through adversity and people who are diminished by it is not the severity of what they faced. It's how they interpreted it. The person who sees adversity as proof that life is against them becomes bitter and defeated. The person who sees adversity as a challenge to overcome, a problem to solve, or a teacher offering harsh lessons becomes stronger. This is not about denying that some obstacles are genuinely unjust, or that some suffering serves no purpose. Not all difficulty is meaningful, but the question of meaning is within your control. You cannot always control what happens. You can always control what you make it mean. The obstacle can mean, I am powerless, or it can mean, I am being tested and will emerge more capable. Same obstacle, completely different trajectory. Winners develop a specific cognitive habit. They ask different questions when facing difficulty. Not why is this happening to me, but what is this teaching me? Not how do I avoid this, but how do I get through this? Not who can I blame, but what can I control? These questions redirect attention from victimhood to agency, from helplessness to action. There's also the principle of voluntary hardship. the deliberate choice to face difficulty when you don't have to. Athletes train harder than the competition requires. Students tackle problems beyond what's assigned. Entrepreneurs take on challenges that exceed their current capability. This voluntary engagement with difficulty has two effects. It builds competence, and it changes your relationship with discomfort. You learn that you can handle hard things. That learning becomes foundational confidence. Research on resilience consistently shows that people who have faced and overcome challenges are better equipped to handle future challenges. Not because hardship is good in itself, but because the process of overcoming builds psychological resources. You develop problem-solving skills. You learn emotional regulation. You discover that setbacks are not permanent. These capabilities transfer to every subsequent challenge. The practical application is to reframe obstacles in real time. When something goes wrong, the immediate emotional response is disappointment or frustration. That's normal. But after the initial reaction, ask, what can I learn from this? And how can this make me better? What capability do I need to develop to handle this? These questions don't make the obstacle disappear. They make it useful. There's a difference between embracing adversity and romanticizing it. You don't need to seek out suffering or pretend difficulty is enjoyable. But when it arrives, and it will, you can choose to engage with it as a crucible rather than a catastrophe. The metal that's never been tested breaks under pressure, and the metal that's been forged in heat becomes stronger because of it. You are not fragile, but you only discover that through testing. Chapter 8, The Comparison Trap. Running your own race. There is perhaps no faster way to destroy your confidence and motivation than constant comparison to others. And there has never been a time in human history when comparison was more pervasive, immediate, and unavoidable than it is now. Social media has created a 24/7 highlight reel of everyone else's success, carefully curated and strategically presented to look effortless. You see the outcome, the award, the body, the relationship, with the vacation, the milestone, without seeing the years of unglamorous effort that produced it. You compare your behind-the-scenes struggle to their public-facing success, and the comparison is not just unfair, it's impossible. The psychological term for this is upward social comparison, and research shows it reliably produces envy, dissatisfaction, and decreased well-being. The more time people spend on social media comparing themselves to others, the worse they feel about their own lives. This is not because their lives are objectively worse. It's because comparison shifts attention from what you have to what you lack. The alternative is not to pretend other people don't exist or to avoid all awareness of what others are accomplishing. The alternative is to recognize that comparison to others is fundamentally meaningless. You are not running their race. You don't have their starting point, their resources, their constraints, or their goals. Measuring your progress against theirs makes as much sense as comparing your Chapter 3 to someone else's Chapter 27. Winners compare themselves to their past selves. The only meaningful question is, am I better than I was last month, last year, 3 years ago? Am I making progress toward my goals, or am I standing still? The answer to that question requires no information about anyone else. It requires only honest self-assessment of your own trajectory. This shift from external comparison to internal assessment is one of the most psychologically liberating moves you can make. It removes the endless treadmill of trying to keep up with people who are on completely different paths. It restores focus to what's within your control, and it allows you to celebrate others' success without feeling diminished by it, because their success is not happening on your timeline. There's also the reality that what you see of other people is almost never the full picture. The successful entrepreneur you envy might be struggling with health problems you don't see. The person with the perfect relationship might be dealing with private challenges you'll never know about. The colleague who seems effortlessly competent might be barely holding it together behind the facade. You are comparing your full, messy internal reality to a tiny, polished slice of someone else's external presentation. The comparison is built on incomplete data. When you do notice yourself comparing, the practice is not to suppress the thought, but to redirect it. Instead of, they're so much further ahead than me, try, their progress shows it's possible. Instead of, I should be where they are. Try, I'm building something different on my own timeline. Instead of, I'll never catch up. Try, I don't need to catch up because we're running different races. Remember, you can also use comparison constructively by studying people who are ahead of you, not to feel bad about the gap, but to learn what they did to get there. Not to copy their path exactly, but to extract principles and strategies that might apply to yours. This type of comparison is motivating rather than demoralizing because it's directed toward learning, not judgment. The deepest issue with comparison is that it externalizes the definition of success. When you measure yourself against others, you're letting them define what success means. You're chasing their goals, their values, their version of achievement. Winners define success for themselves based on their own values and priorities, and then pursue that definition without constant checking to see if they're ahead or behind someone else. Run your own race, at your own pace, toward your own finish line. The only person you're competing with is who you were yesterday. That's the only comparison that matters. Chapter 9, Protecting Your Mental Space. Guarding against negativity. Your mind is not a neutral space. It is a garden. What grows there is determined by what you plant and what you allow to take root. If you are careless about what enters your mental environment, the content you consume, the conversations you have, the people you spend time with, you will find that weeds grow faster than flowers. The research on emotional contagion shows that moods, attitudes, thoughts, and behaviors spread through social networks like viruses. Spend time with pessimistic people, and you will become more pessimistic. Spend time with people who complain constantly, and you will find yourself complaining more. Spend time with people who are building things, learning, and moving forward, and you will do the same. This is not conscious imitation. It is automatic social synchrony. This means that one of the most consequential decisions you make is who you allow into your inner circle. Not everyone deserves access to your time, your attention, and your mental space. Some people are energy sources. They leave you feeling more capable, more motivated, more clear. Other people are energy drains. They leave you feeling depleted, discouraged, more confused. The first group earns more access. The second group earns boundaries. Boundaries are not cruel. They are necessary. You cannot maintain a winner's mindset if you are constantly surrounded by people who reinforce limiting beliefs, who traffic in negativity, who pull you into drama, or who resent your ambition. This doesn't mean you cut everyone out of your life who has problems or goes through hard times. It means you protect yourself from people whose default mode is victimhood, complaint, and pulling others down. Content consumption matters just as much as social environment. The average person spends multiple hours per day consuming media, news, social feeds, videos, podcasts. Very little of that consumption is deliberate. Most of it is passive scrolling, and most of what gets surfaced by algorithms is designed to provoke strong emotional reactions. Outrage, fear, envy, anxiety. These emotions drive engagement, which drives advertising revenue. But they destroy focus, optimism, and mental clarity. Winners are highly selective about information intake, and they consume content that educates, challenges, or inspires them. They avoid content that makes them feel worse without providing any useful information or actionable insight. They curate their feeds, unfollow accounts that generate negativity, and set boundaries around when and how they consume news. They treat their attention as the valuable resource it is and refuse to give it away for free. There's also the internal environment, the voice in your own head. For many people, their harshest critic is themselves. They would never speak to another person the way they speak to themselves. The internal monologue is relentlessly negative, judgmental, catastrophizing. This self-talk is not motivating, it is demoralizing, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The practice of cognitive reframing, which we discussed earlier, applies here. When you notice harsh self-talk, pause. Ask, is this true? Is this useful? What would I say to a friend in this situation? Finally, then say that to yourself instead. This is not about replacing criticism with blind praise. It's about treating yourself with the same basic respect and encouragement you would offer someone you care about. Protecting your mental space also means creating space for silence, for thinking, for processing. Modern life is filled with noise, and the absence of external input allows internal clarity to emerge. Winners build time into their days for quiet reflection, whether through meditation, e-journaling, walking without headphones, or simply sitting without distraction. This is not wasted time. This is where insight happens, where priorities become clear, where the signal emerges from the noise. You cannot control everything that happens to you. You can control what you allow into your mental environment. Guard it carefully. Be selective about who has access. Be intentional about what you consume. Be kind to yourself in your internal dialogue. Your mind is the space from which everything else in your life emerges. Protect it accordingly. Chapter 10. The Winner's Mindset in Action. Living what you've learned. Understanding how winners think is useful. Living like a winner is what matters. And the gap between understanding and action is where most knowledge goes to die. You've absorbed the concepts in this audiobook. Now comes the harder part, integrating them into daily life so thoroughly that they become automatic. Start with awareness. Before you can change thought patterns, you have to notice them. For the next week, simply observe. When you face a challenge, what's your immediate thought? When something goes wrong, where does your mind go? When you see someone else succeed, what do you feel? Don't judge these thoughts, just notice them. Write them down if it helps. The act of observation begins the process of change. Once you've built awareness, start with one pattern to change. Not 5, not 10. 1. Pick the thought pattern that's most limiting you right now. Maybe it's catastrophizing. Maybe it's comparison. Maybe it's fixed mindset thinking. Whatever it is, commit to challenging it every time it appears. Use the cognitive reframing techniques we've discussed. Ask better questions. Rewrite the narrative. Do this consistently for 30 days. The pattern will weaken. A new pattern will begin to form. Build a morning practice. The first 20 minutes of your day set the tone for everything that follows. Winners use this time deliberately. Some meditate, some journal, some visualize the day ahead, some review their goals. The specific practice matters less than the consistency and the intention. You are priming your brain for the mindset you want to operate from. You are setting the mental frame before the chaos of the day begins. Create environmental reminders, visual cues that prompt the mental habits you're building. A note on your mirror that says, "What's within my control?" A screensaver that reminds you of your long-term goal. A bracelet or object that represents the identity you're building. These cues interrupt automatic patterns and bring conscious choice back into the moment. Use setbacks as practice. Every time something goes wrong, you have an opportunity to practice thinking like a winner. Don't wait for the perfect moment to apply these concepts. Apply them when it's hard, when you're disappointed, when you failed. That's when the practice matters most. Ask, what can I learn? What's within my control? What would a winner do next? Seek feedback and mentorship. Find people who think the way you want to think and spend time with them. Ask them how they approach challenges, how they maintain confidence, how they handle failure. Their patterns will influence yours through exposure and conversation. You cannot build a winner's mindset in isolation from people who already have one. Track your progress. Keep a journal of wins, lessons learned, and moments when you caught yourself thinking differently. The act of recording makes progress visible and reinforces the new patterns. On days when you feel like nothing is changing, you can look back and see evidence that it is. Be patient with yourself. Changing deeply ingrained thought patterns takes time. You will revert to old patterns. You will forget what you've learned. You will have days where thinking like a winner feels impossible. That's normal. The practice is not to be perfect. The practice is to notice when you've slipped and gently redirect, over and over, until the new patterns become as automatic as the old ones were. Remember that mindset is not a destination. It's a practice. You don't reach a point where you've mastered it and can stop paying attention. Even elite performers have to maintain their mental habits deliberately. The difference between them and everyone else is that they've made the practice non-negotiable. It's part of their routine. It's how they operate. It becomes who they are. Imagine yourself 1 year from now, not in some fantasy where everything is perfect, But in the realistic outcome of taking this seriously, you have built new thought patterns, rewritten old narratives, practiced visualization, guarded your mental space, trained yourself to think like a winner. When challenges arise, your first thought is no longer, I can't, but how can I? When setbacks happen, you don't spiral into self-criticism. You ask what you can learn and what to do next. When you see others succeed, you feel inspired rather than diminished. When fear appears, you recognize it and act anyway. When self-doubt whispers, you have evidence to counter it. You are not suddenly fearless. You are not immune to disappointment or frustration, but your relationship with those emotions has changed. They don't control you. They don't stop you. They are simply information passing through while you continue moving forward. The people around you have noticed something. There's a quality of steadiness to you, a sense that you believe in what you're doing, that you're not rattled by the things that rattle most people. They might not be able to name what's different, but they feel it, and increasingly, they want to be around it. None of this required different circumstances. It didn't require a better upbringing, a lucky break, or natural talent you don't have. It required the decision to take your thought patterns seriously, to stop letting them run on autopilot and start directing them intentionally. It required practice, consistency, the willingness to catch yourself thinking old patterns and choose new ones. That's available to you right now. Today. The mind you have today is the product of the thoughts you've been thinking. The mind you'll have next year will be the product of the thoughts you choose to think starting now. And that choice, the decision about where to direct your attention, what meaning to assign to events, what story to tell yourself about who you are, is yours and yours alone. The external circumstances of your life might not change overnight, but the way you experience those circumstances will. And that change, that shift in how you think about what happens to you, changes everything downstream from it. How you feel, how you act, what you attempt, how you respond to failure, how long you persist. Success starts in the mind not because thoughts are magic, but because thoughts determine action, and action, repeated over time, determines outcomes. The winner's mind doesn't guarantee you'll win every time. Nothing does. But it radically increases the probability. And it ensures that when you don't win, you learn, adjust, and come back stronger. Start today, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Now, pick one thought pattern from this audiobook, one that resonated, one that you recognized in yourself, one that's been holding you back, and commit to challenging it every time it appears for the next 30 days. That's the beginning. That's how the mind changes. One pattern at a time, one day at a time, one choice at a time. The winner's mind is built, not born, and the person doing the building is you. Build it.